People are constantly coming up with new ways to describe things, and nowhere is this more apparent than in media discussions online. With the prevalence of buzzwords taking over most discussions, people have found the strangest and funniest ways to call tropes, genres, and even mediums entirely different things that are somehow able to just click. There is always something new coming up, and it's fascinating watching how creative people can get describing things. Enter the conclusion merchant, a new slang I've become obsessed with that makes use of the merchant suffix, which is defined as a character who does one particular thing a lot. It's a versatile word that is often used in a derogatory way to describe an aspect of a character you don't like. For example, one could call Captain Hitsugaya from Bleach a Bankai merchant, Naruto a Rasengan merchant, or the entirety of Demon Slayer a flashback merchant. It can be applied to just about anything. However, when combined with the word conclusion, the meaning changes ever so slightly. A conclusion merchant refers to a character, or sometimes a narrative device, whose ending is the most defining thing about them. Their character writing and role in the story might be underdeveloped, inconsistent and underwhelming, but all that gets eclipsed with the way their story ends, usually with their deaths, for better or worse. The end to their character arc is the most memorable thing about them and is often the first thing that gets brought up when discussing them. And while not every character that dies becomes a conclusion merchant, a lot of conclusion merchants die because death can be seen as the ultimate narrative tool that plays to your emotions, leaving a stronger impact on you. So without further ado, here are some anime characters I believe count as conclusion merchants. This might upset a lot of you watching, so brace yourselves. Also, just in case, here is a spoiler warning for every series I will be talking about. With that out of the way, let's begin. First up is Lelouch from Code Geass. Chances are you immediately thought of Lelouch once I explained what a conclusion merchant was, and who can blame you? The ending to Code Geass is often lauded as one of the best anime endings ever because of Lelouch's sacrifice. Orchestrating his death to unite the world against a common enemy could be seen as a masterful final gambit, but what it does is pull the wool over your eyes on how messy the second season of Code Geass really was, especially when it came to Lelouch as a character. The story becomes pretty inconsistent with his motivations and his moral compass bending around just to fit the plot. Yet it doesn't really matter because all of that gets waved away thanks to his death, which is what elevates a pretty middling experience to a pretty good one. If you think I'm reaching, just look at Attack on Titan, which has a lot of similarities with Code Geass, but thanks to Eren's consistent writing and development, it makes him an all-around memorable character. If anything, Eren's end is the least memorable part about him. Another prime case of a conclusion merchant would be Kamina from Gurren Lagann. He's remembered as the soul of Gurren Lagann, and that's mostly because of the way he goes out in a blaze of glory. A lot of people, myself included, who watched Gurren Lagann blind were absolutely devastated when he died for real early on in the series. But looking back, the signs were there with how he always pushed Simon to believe in himself. His positive manly energy made him such a likable character, which is why his death hits extra hard. What makes Kamina a conclusion merchant is how his death completely changes the tone of the series moving forward. His loss is treated as something sacred and gives Simon the motivation to keep moving forward. His death does more for the series than when he was alive, which I think is really cool. And frankly, I don't think the series would be that good if he stuck around to the end. Kamina is actually a rare example of a good conclusion merchant, but then again, that might just be thanks to how solid of a series Gurren Lagann is. Next is Maes Hughes from Full Metal Alchemist. Wait, don't click off the video yet, hear me out. I understand how universally beloved Hughes is, but think about it. Aside from being a doting father who loves his family, he's a simple but charming character. However, the most memorable thing about him is how he dies at the hands of envy and how his death motivates Roy Mustang. In fact, his death is basically used to give Mustang aura, first during his funeral and his iconic "It's a Terrible Day for Rain" scene, and second is when he's finally able to face envy and avenge his friend. Hughes' death is a huge emotional turning point for the series and sets Mustang's drive to reform the system, making him a textbook conclusion merchant. Following Hughes is Ichimaru Gin from Bleach. Gin's death turned him from a shallow smug character into a tragic fan favorite. Throughout most of Bleach, he's left mysterious, sarcastic, and very untrustworthy. He tried to remain in the background throughout most of Bleach until it was time to reveal his true motives in betraying Aizen and trying to kill him. Too bad he failed and only made Aizen stronger. His betrayal and subsequent flashback revealing his motivations before Rangiku have made fans see him more of a tragic anti-hero, and forget how flat of a character he really was. It doesn't change the fact that most of his defining character moments are in the very end of his arc, and in the grand scheme of things, didn't accomplish much, making him a certified conclusion merchant. Now, this one is going to upset a lot of people, but Ace from One Piece is also a conclusion merchant. Ace is pretty much remembered for dying. His death in Marineford is one of the most shocking moments in One Piece because of how up until that point, people rarely ever died in One Piece. I'm one of the people who think Oda did Ace dirty because of how his story was handled. After leaving Luffy in Alabasta, he faces Blackbeard and gets beaten off screen, and when next we see and hear about him, he's in Impel Down with his execution right around the corner. Ace wasn't really given a lot of time to develop before his death, and after he dies, we are treated to a flashback arc exploring his childhood with Luffy and Sabo. Ace's death mostly serves to break Luffy and give him some much needed development. To me, his death is iconic not because of, well, he dies, but because of how it affects Luffy. I felt bad for Luffy more than anything. Things are made even worse for him with the appearance of Sabo, who inherits the Mera Mera no Mi and basically becomes Ace too. Too bad his character is also pretty underwhelming. Much like Ace, Kite from Hunter x Hunter is roughly in the same spot. Kite's death at the hand of Pito mostly serves to drive Gon to the brink of obsession and rage. While alive, he briefly serves as a mentor to Gon and a connection to his father, but he doesn't stick around long enough for you, the viewer, to actually form an emotional bond with. His case is made even worse when he becomes a reanimated corpse. However, Kite does get to come back, reincarnating as a Chimera Ant, but all that does is make him one of the very few conclusion merchants to actually come back from death. We don't get a lot in terms of his new characterization considering the current state of the Hunter x Hunter manga, but until then, I stand by the notion that Kite counts as a conclusion merchant. The next couple of characters will be coming from one series in particular, but before I get into them, I just got to ask you guys to leave a like if you're enjoying this video, and also subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. If you think there are other characters that count as conclusion merchants, let me know in the comments. It doesn't have to be just from anime too. So with that out of the way, let's continue. Naruto is a series with a lot of characters that actually die. I think among the big three, it's the one with the most notable character deaths. It's got a lot of characters that almost make it into conclusion merchant territory, but thankfully they are remembered for parts other than their death. Like Bra, with the way a lot of character arcs end, you could call Kishimoto a conclusion wholesaler. First is Asuma. Asuma is remembered mostly for his death and the pain it brought Team 10, specifically Shikamaru. He's giving way more weight in his death than he ever did in life. There isn't a lot to remember about him, aside from the fact that he bagged Kurenai. Hell, I bet a lot of you don't even remember he was part of the 12 Guardian Ninjas, a group that becomes the central focus of a filler arc that happens just before the arc where he dies at the hands of Hidan. So if you ended up skipping the filler arc or were manga only, you would have even less Asuma content to work with. His death mostly serves to fuel Shikamaru's revenge against Hidan, though you can see his influence in later characters like his daughter Mirai and Konohamaru. But because of Boruto's reputation, it's barely noted, so his death remains the most standout thing about him. Next is Neji. Neji has got to be one of the worst fall-offs of the series. Early Naruto cemented him as a standout character, a prodigy that was unfortunately trapped by destiny because he was born into one of the Hyuga clan's branch families, which meant he was bound to a life of servitude to the main family and grew up with the belief that everyone had a predetermined fate. His character had great setup, peaks in the Chunin exams, and slowly fades into the background after the Sasuke retrieval arc. Aside from fighting his clone in Shippuden, he doesn't really do much until the final arc where he sacrifices himself to protect Hinata and Naruto. This is how he's remembered today, and a lot of people don't like it because after being irrelevant for so long, he shows up in the final arc only to die. The nature of his death also feels contradictory to his character arc of overcoming fatalism, since he does the very thing he was fated to do, belonging to the branch family. And also, it feels like his death was used as the catalyst to push Naruto and Hinata's romance. Neji's conclusion is one that felt kind of unearned, lacking in closure, making him one of the more atrocious cases of a conclusion merchant. Finally is Konan, another character with a lot of potential. Unfortunately, being the only female member of the Akatsuki and being written by Kishimoto no less, meant she was going to suffer one way or the other. Konan spends most of the series standing behind Nagato, and after he dies at the end of the Pain arc, she isn't seen until the 4th Great Ninja War where she fights Obito one-on-one, and if not for plot armor, she would have hoarded his ass. Pun intended. She is pretty much remembered for this moment, as her legacy now is being the person who almost took down Obito but goes out in a blaze of glory. It's a shame that she meets her end before she ever becomes a fully realized character, cementing her in the Conclusion Merchant's Hall of Fame. At the end of the day, being a conclusion merchant isn't always a bad thing. Heck, it's what makes a lot of these characters become unforgettable, despite how lackluster the writing behind them can be. showing us just how much weight an ending has on a story. Anyway, time for me to conclude this video. As always, this has been your very favorite slice of bread. Stay toasty.